process of learning a language is a lot like just getting slapped in the face repeatedly for years on end until one day you don't get slapped anymore. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Story Learning podcast. Today we have a question about choosing your next language, and it comes from someone who's already what we would call a polyglot, someone who speaks 4 languages and is a bit confused over what their 5th language should be. An interesting problem. Before we get into it, if you enjoy the podcast, the best way that you could support me and support the show would be to leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. So that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, I think it's called these days, wherever it is. If you'd like to leave us a star rating and review, that's always very helpful to get the podcast discovered by other people. So let's get into today's question. It comes from Onura, said with my finest British accent. I don't know if it's Onura. Anyway, Onura says, "Hi Olly, I've been following you for a while now. I am myself a polyglot speaking 4 languages, and in January I'm planning to start my 5th, either Italian or French." It's very precise. Why January? Interesting. "But I have a huge anxiety on which one to choose. I'm an overthinker, so to say. I currently speak English, Swedish, Turkish, and Spanish. So for me, the most important thing with language is to feel included, meet new friends, maybe even find romance." Yes. So those things are my parameters for choosing a new language. Which one would you choose if you thought like me? Where did you feel more included, more appreciated for speaking the local language? Or was it France or Italy? That's really interesting because when I think about my relationship with languages, it's changed a lot over the years, right? The way that I relate to languages is very different now in my 40s than it was when I was in my 20s. And Onura, I've got to say, I was a lot like you in my 20s. I don't know how old you are, but certainly when I was in my 20s, I thought a lot like this, right? My reasons for learning languages were just what you say. I mean, it's to feel included, it's to meet new friends. I felt like, so I obviously grew up in the UK, but I never really felt like I belonged very much. I was kind of always a bit different from everyone else. And for me, languages were a way to explore the world, find people that I connected with in different ways. And so I really relate to this question of, what language will help me feel more included, meet new friends. And the romance thing, I can relate to that as well. I think many of us who are into languages, we see so much great stuff to be explored and to be discovered around the world, right? We want to explore that, and languages are like the best way to possibly do that. So first, when we think about languages, there are kind of 2 dimensions to think about. One is your personal interest and your motivation. And the second is the relative difficulty of a language, right? Because as an English speaker, to learn Mandarin Chinese, for example, is going to be a lot more difficult than learning French because of the relative distance of the language. And so the languages that you already speak, which are very interesting here, English, Swedish, Turkish, and Spanish, that has a very clear impact on how easy it's going to be for you to learn your 5th language, right? So I recommend that you grab a copy of my language difficulty guide. And this is a guide that tells you the difficulty of languages in relation to languages you already speak, right? So for example, if you know Turkish, there are going to be certain languages that you're going to have a backdoor into that are going to be a lot easier. So I've broken down all of the main languages of the world into 9 different tiers. That's 9 as opposed to the usual 5. And normally, if you've seen the FSI chart, it's broken down into levels 1 to 5. Our guide is broken down into levels 1 to 9, and it can also show you which ones will be easier or harder for you based on the languages you already speak. So I would definitely grab a copy of that and just look through it to familiarize yourself. There's a link in the description to grab that if you would like. And look, so you were asking me specifically, where did I feel most included for speaking the local language? Was it France or Italy? And I've got to say it's Italy. France, I always found to be quite a difficult place, quite a challenging place to be. People are extremely proud of their language in France, and rightly so. And I always felt, certainly when I was there, which was over 25 years ago now, that, if you didn't, where I was in Paris, you'd have some very funny situations, right? Where if you were just learning French and you weren't very good at it, the locals were just there, even if they spoke English, they would kind of pretend not to understand you and deliberately make it difficult for you. And, that kind of environment does make it quite challenging for language learners. One easy way around that would be don't go to Paris. Find a different environment to be, maybe somewhere in the countryside or a smaller provincial town or something. There's many great parts of France that are not Paris, and obviously many great French people as well. I'm just telling you the experience that I had. And then likewise, when I went to Italy, I found that people there, really didn't speak much English at all. I think that's changed now. Again, I was in Italy, a long time ago, but I did find that people in Italy, just compared to the French, are a lot less proud and are usually perfectly happy to speak to you in Italian if you already speak Italian. But look, those are anecdotal experiences, and that's going to change completely depending on your situation, right? So if you put yourself into let's say you went into a university environment, or you went into an environment where the language was not the main point, right? You're there to do something else and you happen to do it in the language, like that always helps. It's really going to depend on the situation that you put yourself in. I found, funnily enough, with the other Romance languages that I know, which is Spanish and Portuguese, I found that relatively speaking, I found a lot more inclusion being in Brazil and being in Spain. I think it's just a cultural thing. The Brazilians are just incredible for this. Anyone can just go to Brazil, and on day one, you just got a million friends. And they don't speak great English there, and they love speaking their own language. And it's just a wonderful place socially to be, which is what you said here, Onura, to feel included, to meet new friends. Brazil is just great for that, right? But Spain as well, because I don't know, the Spanish and the Italians are, I think in a way they're very similar, but the Spanish tend to have, I don't know, I feel like they have a slightly broader, like Italians can be quite insular. I've always thought you've got two types of Italians. You've got the Italians who leave Italy and go and live in somewhere like London. And then you've got the Italians that just stay in Italy, and they're quite different. I've had so many Italian friends over the years. I still do. And the Italians who stay in Italy, they stay because they love their country, love their culture, and they don't tend to be all that interested in the outside. Whereas in Spain, I found that people are always naturally quite interested in other people. They're quite interested in foreign cultures. I can't really tell you why that is. That's the way that I found it. So, if it's a choice between France and Italy and you want to have an easier time, I'd just say Italy all day long. But, I really think that the way to, for people like us, who just enjoy learning languages, this anxiety that you mention here, when you say you have a huge anxiety on which one to choose, you say you're an overthinker, I really relate to that. And I think I would encourage you to, when you're thinking about these languages, when you're thinking about how to approach language learning, you're going to find it so much easier if you can relate this to a different task, right? Whether that is like when I was in Japan, for example, I used to take salsa dancing lessons, and I started speaking a lot of Japanese because I was in salsa classes. When I was in Argentina, I remember enrolling in a local school to study. I can't remember what it was that I studied, but it was something that was not. Oh, I was enrolled in a martial arts school. I was studying something called Bagua for like 6 months, and I met a load of Spanish or Argentine friends who spoke Spanish in that place. Any time that I've really focused on the language and I've looked to other people from the country to help me with the language, I found it to be a lot of pressure. I found it to be psychologically quite difficult because language learning is a long-term thing, right? And the process of learning a language is a lot like just getting slapped in the face repeatedly for years on end until one day, like, you don't get slapped anymore. And it can be quite a challenging journey, which is why, if you can focus on doing something else, a different pursuit where the language kind of comes along for the ride, that's, I think, how to make this easier. So I hope there's something in there. This is the kind of question where really the best thing I can do is share my experience, which is obviously very unique to me, very personal to me. But I'd love to hear in the comments from anyone else who has thoughts on this. Whatever you decide to do, I wish you the best of luck with it. And if you'd like to ask me a question, you can look for a link in the comments, or you can send me a voice note. Equally, you can leave comments on Spotify and the YouTube comments. You can email me, which is olly@storylearning.com. We pick all of these things up, and I will try to answer a question for you in the future. So thanks very much for listening, and I'll see you back in the next episode of the podcast.